All right, we're going to go ahead and get started here. Good morning. My name is Evan Lange. With the Signatry. We're glad you can be a part of this webinar and conversation this morning. I'm going to go ahead and stop my video and we'll get started here. So the purpose of this webinar is we're going to first hit on the CARES Act and really talk about some of the strategies and opportunities. The CARES Act obviously was enacted at the end of last month, and a lot of things have started to occur really because of that. And so we don't really want to provide a summary because you probably have heard about 20 of those so far. What we really want to talk about are some of the strategies around the CARES Act. And then we're also going to have a conversation with a friend of mine and a colleague, Alan Pratt, who's out of Seattle, Washington. You guys are going to be blessed to hear what Alan has to say, because Alan has had over 40 years of in the financial services industry before coming on with the Signatry. And so it should be we're going to have a great conversation and really looking forward to seeing what God does. So why are you a part of this webinar? Again, like I said, we're going to have two parts. And the first part here is the real practical steps and some of the hidden opportunities that are within the CARES Act are really around charitable giving, but we're going to hit around some of the other tax provisions as well. And again, really hit the strategies. And then we're going to shift into the bulk of our time, which Alan's going to be able to share some of the ways that in the past he's addressed concerns and anxieties of clients during chaotic seasons, and how to implement some of these other charitable giving strategies as well. So, like I said, my name is Evan Lange. I'm the president of the Midwest region for the Signatry here, and this is what I looked like before quarantine. You'll be able to see a video here in a second. And so the time at home with my family has been great, but maybe not for my appearance sakes. So let's jump into the CARES Act here. So the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, $2.2 trillion legislation that passed at the end of March. And what's even more exciting is that last night, the Senate passed a bill for $484 billion, so almost $500 billion last night, which will add on to the CARES Act as well. A lot of that is for the PPP that everybody's heard about to help small businesses. About $330 billion will be specifically for small businesses. But we're going to focus on 5 kind of key elements of the CARES Act, and a lot of these will be effect on the 2020 tax returns that people will be filing obviously next year. And so we're going to hit on some of the charitable giving components, the income tax deductions, and then some of the effects on retirement accounts and net operating losses as well. So real quick, let's hit the above the line deduction. Now, this is a fun deduction and that Congress has actually talked about for a long time. And so it took a pandemic in order for this to get passed. But this is a universal tax deduction. So this is for people that do not itemize their tax deduction, their taxes. And so they're taking the standard deduction. They're still available to receive a benefit for charitable contributions. Now, what's really interesting about this, so it's for $300 per individual, $600 per married couples filing jointly. For, again, non-itemizers, so 90% of all tax filers will be able to qualify for this. And it's only for qualified charities, so this cannot go to donor-advised funds or private foundations. These gifts have to be in cash, so no appreciated assets. And it has to occur in the taxable year, so in 2020. What's really interesting that I found out about this, and some colleagues of mine have had conversations around this, and the real early on legislation or conversations about this is that it was supposed to be just for 2020. But the way that the provision was written, and you can see this is the exact language in section 2020 or 22, and it appears to be a permanent provision that's going to be applied, so that this could be universal throughout, which would be really interesting if that ends up occurring. But again, that's for 90% of the non-itemizers of all tax filers. And so with the standard deduction, a married couple filing jointly are going to be able to deduct over $25,000 from their individual tax returns, which is pretty exciting. The next provision I want to really hit on a little bit more, because this one's gotten a little bit more publicity, I guess, from the media and from nonprofits, is that 100% tax deduction to qualified public charity. So this is for cash gifts, and then again, this is for itemizers. So you can deduct 100% of your income from your tax return by giving to a public charity. Again, this is not to donor advised funds or private foundations or supporting organizations, but it is to public charities. It's to get dollars to charities right away during this pandemic. Now, you can see some of the strategies around here. So the quid pro quo that I mentioned, this is for if you go to a banquet or something else where there is a good or a service that's provided, and then part of the gift is for charitable purposes. So you spend $100 to attend a banquet, 10 of those dollars is considered for your food, and 90% a tax deduction. That would still appear to be okay under this CARES Act provision. And the same is true for charitable gift annuities. A charitable gift annuity provides an immediate income tax deduction and goes to a specific charity. And so it appears that that also would be able to qualify in this 100% deduction. What does not probably qualify is a charitable remainder trust, because the remainder interest would go to charity. And the real legislative intent, again, when I went to law school, this is what they always taught, is that if you look to the statute and look to the regulations and look to the cases, but then if you don't find any of that, which we don't have because this law was just recently passed, you go to what is the legislative intent. And the real intent behind this legislation is to get dollars to charities right away. And so a charitable remainder trust doesn't really put dollars to a charity right away. It takes a term of years or for the person to pass away in order to those dollars to go. But here's the strategy behind this. And again, this is getting a lot of publicity of people saying, how can I maximize this? And this is a real benefit to charity. It's not necessarily a benefit for the taxpayer, for the donor. And here's an example. So if you look at your tax rates, there's 7 tax rates, all the way ranging from 10% for people that make under $19,000, all the way up to income over, for married filing jointly, of over $600,000, you're taxed at 37%. And then there's 7 tax rates in between. If you deduct 100%, so you give 100% of your income away to a qualified charity this year, a couple of negative things are going to happen. One is you're going to miss out on some of the other tax deductions that you could have had, like the SALT. So state and local income taxes, you can deduct up to $10,000. That does not carry forward. So you would be missing out on that. You'd also be missing out on your mortgage interest, on your first mortgage interest deduction. That is not available for carryover as well. And so I don't really see a whole lot of people doing this. And again, donor advised funds are not included. From everything that we've seen so far, the donor advised funds are still capped at 60% of adjusted gross income for cash gifts. And so I just did a quick kind of back of the napkin look at this to see, okay, if you had a person, a single taxpayer that's in the highest tax bracket, say they make $400,000 of taxable income. If they were to give 100% of that away in 2020, that would save them just over $114,000 in income taxes in this year, which is a pretty good thing. But say instead they were to give 60% of their income to a donor advised fund, and then it may be even 100%, and then carry forward the next 40% for the next year, for 2021, that would end up saving them almost $140,000. And the reason for that is because of those income tax brackets. When you deduct, you're deducting from the highest income tax bracket all the way down to the lowest. When you do the carryover, it stays at the highest income tax bracket. So that charitable gift, instead of being applied to a 35% tax bracket, it's now being applied to a 10% tax bracket. Kind of a cute little trick here, but again, I think if you have a client that's looking at, hey, I want to maximize my charitable deductions for this year, maybe consider the donor advised fund instead for those cash gifts. All right, let's move on to the corporate deductions. So the corporate deductions have also increased from 25 to 25% of taxable income. So again, this is for C corporations, not for S corporations. And so a C corporation can now deduct up to 25% of its income for charitable gifts. Again, this only goes to qualified charities, not to donor advised funds, private foundations, or SOs, and for cash gifts only. Now, this could be pretty significant because you've seen a lot of large companies start to say, hey, we want to do something during this pandemic crisis. And so we could see some additional corporate giving this year. And something I really have found, and most people don't do this, is the food contribution. So you can deduct, a corporation can deduct food is unused, but is still usable for the public, up to 15%. It's a great tax deduction. And now that's also increased to 25% this year. If you have clients that are on the board, or they have C Corp stock, or maybe they're president or CEO, this would be a great way to say, hey, did you know about these additional deductions for the corporation itself, which could lower down that ultimate the tax burden for the corporation. All right, one last one that I want to hit, and this, or two ones. This is the kind of shifting into the retirement side. So on the retirement accounts for IRAs, there are no RMDs for 2020, which is really interesting. So and this is both for your current IRAs. So if you're 72, or if you were 70 and a half and required to take your required minimum distribution, or if you inherited an IRA and we're now required to take a distribution, you don't have to do so for 2020. This is probably a good thing. And back in March, when the stock market dropped so much, people were really concerned. Hey, I just lost 20% of my retirement account, and now I have to take an RMD. Well, we've had some gains back to the market, not all the way back. And who knows, after the markets open back up and the economy starts going again, we could really see some appreciation in the accounts, and now you don't have to take an RMD. What I would say is still have your clients look at a qualified charitable distribution. Remember, this is up to $100,000 for somebody that's over 70 and a half to go to a specific charity. And again, at the Signatry, that can also go to what we call a designated fund that is designated for one specific charity. So again, something to take a look at for your clients when you move into maybe Q3 or Q4. And then again, on 401k plans, there is a hardship distribution that can be allowed if you've had experienced a hardship due to the coronavirus. You can avoid the 10% penalty if you repay that distribution within 3 years, and you can now take a loan that's doubled up to $100,000. Real quick here, I want to hit on this real small amendment that nobody seems to be talking about, which is the net operating loss usability. And so these slides will be available to those who attend, and this is a real helpful one that we put together that kind of just goes through the makeup of corporations that had net operating losses and how they could be able to take those. And where you see this is in the M&A market. So in business sales, when a company sells, usually for that year of the sale, they might have a net loss, and they would only be able to take that within a certain time period. Under the CARES Act, what you really need to know is that it is basically reversed some of the negative implications for net operating losses that were under the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And so you can see that under the CARES Act now, people that had sold companies potentially in 2018, 19, and then this year can carry back that net operating loss 5 years from the time of the sale. And what's also really interesting about that, if you remember, is that the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act lowered the corporate tax rate from 35% to 21%. So now you can also take that back from when the tax rate for corporations was higher. And so there could be some really significant refunds here. And so what I would say is if you've had clients that have sold their business within the last 3 years, you might have to give them a conversation or a call on this. Now, there are some rules through pass-throughs that this might not affect, but it's still worth a phone call to say, hey, there might be something here. All right, now I want to go into the bulk of our presentation here, which will be a conversation with our expert and my friend, Alan Pratt. And I'm going to stop my screen share here, so hopefully you'll be able to see us just shortly. Now, Alan is from Seattle, and like I mentioned, has over 40 years of experience in the financial services industry before just a few months ago joining on with the Signatry team to become our president of the Northwest region. And so we're extremely blessed to have Alan on our team. So Alan, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Evan. Appreciate the chance to chat with our group this morning.
Good, good. Well, we're going to ask just a couple of questions, and they're going to in line with some of the CARES Act, and we'll just really want to have a conversation here for the rest of our time. So Alan, real quick, I gave a little bit of your background, but would you provide some of your background in the financial services industry and really some of the crisis times that you've walked through clients with? That could be economic downturns or geopolitical crises, those types of things. But give some of your background to some of our guests.
Sure. I'll do this real quickly, and just so our listeners have some context here. I'm a native Northwesterner. I've lived in the Seattle area my entire life. I graduated from college in 1976 and went right to work in January of '77 in the banking business as a bank regulator. And after I left the Treasury Department in 1980, went to work for the banks and was a banker from 1980 to 1992, about 12 years. And then from about 92 up until just last year, I was an advisor in the financial area, primarily in estate planning and charitable giving for families that had one key feature. They had a big heart. And then last year, as you know, Evan, God worked in our lives and brought me together with the Signatry and the Signatry together with me. And so here we are in the new chapter of my life at age 65 and a half. But anyway, that's a real quick snapshot. Yeah. I thought I'd just write down some years because we talked about economic downturns, potentially geopolitical issues, and personal. Here's the economic. 1974, I was in college. I remember standing in line to get gas in the big gas lines in 1974, and I actually saw a fisticuffs happen at a gas station. Terrible. 1981, I was a banker. I was lending at prime plus 2, which was 22% in 1981. 1987, Black Monday. Everybody who kind of remember where they were on Black Monday, market went down about 25% in one day. The whole entire decade of the 90s. I live out in the Seattle area, and in the decade of the 90s, Microsoft employees were expecting an annual rate of return of 40%. That was their expectation year over year. And I can remember talking with them in the late 90s about the need to be humbled. Well, what happened in the year 2000? We had a humbling, the tech drop. And then most recently, about 07, 08, when we had our most recent dip drop, what happened there? And now we're here in our 2020, what I will call a period of pause. And I'll share with why I say this is a pause period. There's good in a pause. Those are the economic ones. The geopolitical ones, I think that I will relate to most is probably the Gulf War. I can remember watching this war unfold on this 24-hour network called CNN. We were watching the war at night happen live, all right? And then we've had, that was 1991, 29 years ago. What are some of the other ones? Well, actually, I'll go back to 1979, 1980. What took place? Iran, and the fall of Iran, and the Shah. I can remember all that. And I have a Persian family that we work with now that emigrated to the U.S. with absolutely nothing in 1980. And here we are 40 years later, and their net worth is not small. But and they are entrepreneurs. They took advantage of the system that the United States brought for them, and they completely started from scratch in 1980. And I love them dearly. So probably 80, 91, and then I mean again for the entire decade of the double lots with Afghanistan and so forth, and still going on. We've had geopolitical, and we still will have more. And then on a personal, and I'll come back to this one. 1999, 21 years ago. My brother is no longer physically with us. This is my older brother who's 2 years older than me. He went home to the Lord in 1999. And it was a hard thing for us as a family. He was 46 years old. I was 44 at the time. But what we've learned in the loss of my brother, at least physically, I won't see him for a while, how we've responded in our own family with regard to our desire to give back for the organizations that really changed his life, particularly in his last 2 years of living. I'll come back to that in a minute with regard to how generosity spurs around life experiences, some of which are very difficult. And that's probably the most important one in the Pratt family that I can refer to, because I love my brother Daryl, and someday I will see him. And so if we don't have time today, I will share that story. So out of all these things, whether economic, whether they're geopolitical, whether they're personal, it's thinking, okay, here's what's happened. How can I respond? And we are now in this period of pause for now 5, 6, 7 weeks, that we get this phenomenal opportunity to thoughtfully think through how we're going to respond. And as professional advisors on the webinar this morning, I'm going to give you some ideas or share some thoughts of how I did this as a professional advisor, starting primarily back in 1992 and coming forward.
Yeah, that's what we're going to move into as well, Alan, because I wanted you to share, because I know we have some newer financial advisors that haven't gone through crises. They didn't go through 2008 and 9. And so, yeah, share some of that, especially for them, of how did you walk clients through some of these crises?
I'm gonna back up to what Evan did in his slides. And when I describe what Evan did in his slides, I call it the what and the how. And where I'm going to focus in now is on the who and the why. And as professional advisors, or we in the Signatry as resources to all of our listeners today, we are a resource to all of you. And when you serve your clients with the knowledge that you know about the CARES Act and all sorts of other legislation that we're called to have a general understanding on, I want to back up a little bit in the terms of working with people and families and business owners, and to really be, I would say, intentional about understanding what's their who and their why. So as a young advisor, I mean, I was a young advisor in 1992, and when I entered into this work in the financial services in the commission world, and that was not a nasty word back then, it was a commission world. And one of the things that I look back on and realize that I learned that can help with our colleagues on the line that maybe have only been doing this for 5 or 10 or 15 years is, don't forget this one. We're all in the same business. We are in the people business. So when things like this happen, I'm going to encourage you to reach out to your clients, existing and prospective, and just have conversation with no agenda, And everybody's looking for opportunity to have dialogue. I had one just the other day. I was expecting to have a 15 or 20 minute call, and it went on for an hour and 20 minutes. And I was the listener. So number one, reach out with no agenda on your communique to your clients and prospective clients. Number two, what I've learned, again, these are just Alan Pratt learnings. Everything that you bring to a conversation, do your best to bring it in the form of a question. Questions, values conscious, open-ended questions are one of the most wonderful resources that we have as professionals to allow the person on the other end of the Zoom call or the phone call these days to share from their heart. And as you listen and listen, you're going to find an opportunity to bring up that follow-up question. And you know where this sort of dialogue will take that conversation? The answer is it will take it exactly where your client wants it to go. not where you want it to go, where they want it to go. So open-ended values conscious questions without agenda on anything in the financial arena, unless that's part of their desire. Okay, if their desire is really to get in the nuts and bolts that Evan just went through, then we need to be prepared to do that. But I'm going to couch that to really being intentional with your open-ended values conscious question about how are you doing? How are you doing? How's your spouse? How's your kids? I mean, I was on a prayer call with our team this morning at 7 a.m. And one of our teammates at the Signatry mentioned one of his friends who just gave him devastating news yesterday that his 25-year-old son took his life. That's life. That's what we're dealing with, guys and gals, because we are in the people business. So yes, we're called to a position to provide guidance and counsel over financial matters and tax matters and legal matters. And I've been in that atmosphere for almost 30 years now, but we can't lose the fact that these are people that we care deeply about. And even though they've still got their $50 million portfolio, they have things that they're struggling with. And we need to, as a young advisor of maybe just being in the business for a few years, just keep on having conversation with the values conscious open-ended questions will allow you to be in that place when they're ready to take action. Those are probably the two keys I'd share.
Yeah, no, those are great, Alan. And I know as when I started practicing law right out of law school, I did a little bit of litigation work. And so I would represent people that were going through lawsuits, a crisis. I mean, if you think of being sued and somebody is trying to take your net worth or rub your reputation through the mud, and it's awful. And I would I used to represent some doctors and hospitals, and I'll never forget this one doctor. And this was his about third or fourth lawsuit. He really was a great doctor. He just kept getting sued, and his demeanor was awful. When you just met him, it just almost made you cringe because he there was no personality whatsoever. And in this one lawsuit, the doctor that actually probably made the mistake wasn't a party of the lawsuit. And the person that brought the lawsuit said, I would never sue that doctor. They were like my friend. I wouldn't sue them. And it was something I took back to my own practice to say, hey, you know what? Relationship is so much more important than, knowing the how and the what.
It really is. So think about those two questions, listeners. Who and the why? Who is it that you choose to engage in conversation? And why? Why do they get up in the morning with a desire and a passion for fill in the blank? And do you know what their blank is? Yeah. What's their blank? Okay. And do they know yours? A third item, and then we'll move on. Everything that you ask in those questions to your prospects and to your clients and your friends, be prepared for them to turn the table and ask you the same questions, and be prepared to answer with joy and passion. The more that they understand all about your who and your why, the more weaved your relationship will get. So when we enter into times like this, which I call it this period of pause, these cannot be broken. It cannot be broken in this period of pause because of what you've invested over the months and years prior to when they pushed the pause button 5 or 6 weeks ago.
Yeah, no, that's great advice, because it's true. I mean, you get that, and in these times, the foxhole moments, if you would, you're building some brotherhoods and some real relationship, and you can do that even in this time too.
Absolutely.
So I want to transition just real quick, Alan, because obviously at the Signatry we get to talk about charitable giving strategies and different things. And I'd love to get your some of your experience and past experiences in financial services of, how did you implement charitable giving strategies in your planning conversations with clients? And how'd you do that even in times like these in crises?
Mm-hmm. Okay. It's going to come back to a couple of fundamentals. And the fundamentals that I'll share here are values and visions. What are the values and visions of your client? Have you had that conversation with them? such that when we ask them, are there certain things going on in the world, in your community, in your family, in your church life, that you really want to really invest your soul in? That's where we understand, where we're going to understand where their desire to go deeper in conversation and eventually bring in the balance sheet to support whatever that passion is. So it starts with that values and visions of understanding of where your client is. And I'll just give you an example. Because I really don't believe, for those that really are living in the spirit of generosity, the synonyms, they're selfless, they're big-hearted, they're lifelong learners, they are encouraging, okay? They are an encourager to others. They get up in the morning with the thought, what can I give away today? Can I give away an idea? Can I give away a thought? Can I give away a relationship? They're givers, okay? And so one of my learnings over those early years when I was just a plebe, let's say, in the industry in the early 90s, I thought much of the focus then would be around putting protection around my wealth. And it was for a while. But what happened as I segued into the mid 90s and the late 90s, that it was not necessarily about putting fences around wealth, which we can do with the tax code every single day. It was about building gates in the wealth so that it could flow through and it could go through and go out to those causes and those passions that these selfless clients of mine would have. So in today's environment, it's no different, other than we have this little pause where I will ask you this. In this pause of the past 6 or 7 weeks, have your convictions changed? Have your values changed? Have your virtues changed? Have your belief systems changed? And the answer is no. Your clients still have those core pillars inside of their being. Now their portfolio might be down a few $1 million. I understand that, but they are the same person on the inside. So when we really have a good understanding of what those are, conversations can happen. And in fact, when it's a pause button, whether it's 2020 or if it's the pause of 2008, 2009, which was scary for those that saw things drop 40% in 6 months, but it all came back. All right. How can we focus in on the non-financial things first and then see where the convictions could take place? I'll give you 2 examples, so then we'll move on. I was pursuing a relationship with a gentleman in the Seattle area. This is early double aughts. This is about 19 years ago. And he wasn't ready. This is on the estate planning and charitable giving front. So I just stuck with him as in conversation for at least once a year, sometimes twice a year, for about 13 years. And in 2015, it was 2015 or 2016, I was sitting down for my my semi-annual lunch with him. And we talked, and I said, his name is John. I said, so John, tell me what's going on. And tell me about your family, tell me your life, because we did this twice a year for about 12 or 13 years. So, and he's kind of a rough guy. He says, oh, not a whole lot. I gave away my kidney. Excuse me? I gave away my kidney. I mean, I got 2 of them. I only need 1. I mean, that's really the way he talked, really. Now, it took me back because he just kind of downplayed it. And I said, John, I want to hear the story. Tell me the story. Because generosity is not all about giving financially. Generosity is a lifestyle. And this man was living in this lifestyle, very quiet and subdued. He was an introvert, still is today. But he didn't bring big exuberance to the fact of jump for joy and tell everybody about this. He just knew it was the right thing to do. For a school buddy that he went to high school with almost 50 years prior, 45 years prior, and he found out that his school buddy was not going to live, and he happened to be a match. Well, anyway, as a part of all that, sharing that story, and he's given me permission now to share this. This was several years ago. It was 15 or 16 when he shared this story with me. He also said, Alan, well, remember when we've been talking for a number of years and I didn't think my financial house was at the point where we should be talking. I think it is now. Here's my point. We cannot control timing on things. How many of us would know 3 months ago that we'd be in this pause? None of us. Okay. How many of us would have known that, the markets would have done phenomenal last year? I mean, here out in the Seattle area, to say that Boeing is shut down and no one's going to work now, as of yesterday they are, but I would say no, there's no way. But the point here is when we are given the opportunity to respond on financial, personal, geopolitical, on matters that we really could not control or could not forecast, that gives us an opportunity to really delve deep into the who and why conversations. So John is a phenomenal one. Another one that I'll just share with you, because it's gonna say, Evan's slides were really, really good, and I appreciate Evan's slides. But when we work with people that have a absolutely gigantic heart, I've got one of those, her name is Marion. She shared with me when I started meeting with her 10, 11, 12 years ago about the joy of giving. And she is a strong believing lady, and she has a compound, let's say, up on an island that's not too far from me, about 50 miles north of Seattle. And she would talk about her giving, because her passion, my conversation about the who and the why, we went really early on in that. And then as she described what she does for missionaries around the world in providing housing and learning experiences in her compound that's about 50 miles north of Seattle, the annual giving equivalent, financial giving, was somewhere in the around $900,000 range. And as she shared with me why she does this, she also told me that she does not even claim it on her tax return. Doesn't even claim it. And her response is, why should I claim it? This has nothing to do with taxes. This has to do with me and the Lord. And still to this day, she gives 6 digits a year and will not even claim it. And her CPA just pulls his hair out because he just doesn't understand that. So the point here is, the more that we can understand someone's who and the why, it will not change in a period of pause. It's still there. It's still there. So I'll just,
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. Yeah, Alan, I thought about this of, your value can drop, it can change everything else, but your values are going to stay the same. And what's, I think this moment of pause of that you're saying, my pastor has been using this term of, idleness will reveal your idols. Mm-hmm. So this time of pause, probably what you're seeing with clients, I know in this conversations I've had with some advisors, it's starting to reveal maybe those idols that I was having, like control. Like, I don't have any control anymore. Maybe control was an idol of mine. Obviously, money and possessions can be that idol, but when you really lean into your walk with Christ, and generosity too. And I love generosity. I mean, at the Signatry, we help people do all sorts of fun tricks and different things and strategies to help you save taxes and give more away. What we really care about is the give more away. Yeah. You know what? The save taxes, if somebody wants to just save taxes, we can point you in directions. But if you want to give and you want to see impact and the world change, that's what our vision is about. We want to see the world change for Christ, for the Great Commission to be fulfilled. And that's what gets me really excited. So that's awesome.
I want to add this, and then you continue on.
Yeah.
In my 27 years prior to joining the Signatry last year, when I was pretty much in private practice, we did a lot of charitable planning. And I will say this with conviction, that the tax reason for the planning was never top on the list. It was something that we wanted to be cognizant of. I'll give you an example. I got a referral about 2010, about 10 years ago. And this young lady of 80 years old who had a balance sheet of about $50 million, I was having my who and my why conversation with her. And she just had something on her heart about, she wanted to see if she could do something for the benefit of families that have members that have experienced trauma. And our regional trauma center in Seattle is a hospital called Harborview Hospital. It's a world-class hospital. But she had it on her heart and on her mind that, what can I do for these people that have motorcycle accidents, that have really severe accidents, and they got to go to Harborview, and the prognosis are sometimes not real good, but they've got family literally flying in from all over the country, literally. She says, can I build an apartment house to house their family and not charge them a dime? What she was kind of describing was a Ronald McDonald House. And she wanted to use her own foundation at the time to build the equivalent of a Ronald McDonald House. And the answer is absolutely. Now, are we going to eventually get into the tax issues associated with that? Of course we're going to. But they're just going to be a sidebar with regard to what she wanted to do for these trauma patients and their family.
Yeah.
That was her why.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I know we've had a couple of questions and different things that have rolled in, and feel free, if you haven't found this out, of the Q&A side or even the chat feature, if you have specific questions on CARES Act provisions or strategies or questions for Alan in some of these early on. But Alan, I did want to ask you, I mean, this time is unprecedented, and I don't want to make light of it that, hey, just have these conversations of charitable giving and everything's okay. I mean, this is unprecedented times. The world has been shut down for weeks, over months, and the world is going to change. And I think in light of the COVID-19 season and all these shutdowns, what changes or differences do you see moving forward in the financial services industry? What do you kind of see happening?
Well, it's going to come back to something we touched on early on, and that is relationship. Okay. I'm going to go deeper on this in just a quick second. I'm going to sidebar for about 45 seconds. Back in my banking days from 1977, when I started as a regular, to when I left the industry in January of 92, I can remember when we went through some down cycles economically, and small businesses, small to medium-sized businesses. Those small to medium-sized businesses that had a bank that stuck with them in those difficult times remember that. They remember that my bank, instead of forcing the demand feature on the note and forcing me to pay up, they worked with them. They worked through this tough economic cycle. And that is always remembered by me as an ex-banker, heavy on the X. All right. So my point here is, who is going to stick with us now in this period of pause, okay? And how your family, your advisory community, the people that you look to for counsel and wisdom on whatever it might be, financial, tax, legal, relational, spiritual, leadership issues. We had a call yesterday with business owners, and it was phenomenal. On the business owners, one of the gentlemen that I know, he talked about he went ahead with his PPP application, and it was successful, and they received a little bit over $1 million on their PPP application, but he had to thoughtfully think it through. And here's why: because he didn't really need the money. I mean, his business was down from here to here, but he thought about this. He said, the PPP is really to keep my people employed. That's the purpose, to keep my people employed. And so when he thought through that, it says, this is not for me, the owner of the widget manufacturing company. This is for my employees. And so that was an others-focused question on the relationship, in this case, between the business owner and his employees. So as we enter into this pause, however long it's going to be, think about the thing. I encourage people to think this: focus on what you have not lost. What have you not lost? I've not lost my relationship with my wife, who's downstairs right now. We've been married 36 years, 2 weeks from now. All right. I've not lost relationship with my 3 kids and my 3 grandkids. I've not lost relationship with my Bible study group, who meets on Zoom tonight at 6:30. Okay. All these things that we have not lost. I encourage people to write them down. Write them down. Okay. And maybe some of the things that we have lost, like the 401ks down 20%, or some of these other things that you say, okay, I'm a little bit nervous because I'm not used to being in this place. Understand that too. But we have an attitude, a period of being joyful and great and in the spirit of gratitude for what we do have. All right. Yes, it's not fun. I don't like this social distancing stuff. I don't think any of us does. Why? Because he wired us to be relational with him and relational with others. And if we got to stay 6 feet from each other, and I got a Zoom call with you and you're 2,000 miles away, and you are, I mean, he wants us to be in relationship. I'm a greeter at my church. I want to be able to hug people when they come in the front door. Well, that's on pause for a while. So as we're on pause and we're thinking through this area of being generous, I encourage everybody on the call to think about this and do it every day. When you wake up in the morning, ask this question: what can you give away today? What can I give away today? And when you put your head on the pillow at night, how do you answer that? What did I give away today? All right. And for our clients and for the people that we love, I encourage them to think the same way, because generosity is reflected in the giving of financial assets and non-financial assets. It is, and we're in that world. That's what we do with the Signatry. But generosity is the spirit of the heart. What about time? We all have 24/7. Does anybody on the call have more than 24 hours? Does anybody have more than 7 days? No. How will we use our time in this period of pause? Yeah. Phenomenal thinking. All right. No, I could go on and on, but I don't want to ramble.
Yeah, no, that's great, Alan. And we're gonna wrap up here too. We've had a couple of specific questions, and some of my friends are texting me the specific questions on the CARES Act. And okay. Hey, you're gonna have Alan's email, my email address. Reach out to us here at the Signatry. We are here, as Alan said, to be a resource for you in these times too. So please reach out to us. We'd love to walk through some of these provisions with you, some of the strategies. I'm going to jump on a call here in a little bit to walk through with an advisor and their client some of the specific strategies behind this act. And again, part 2 is about to be signed into the law probably later this week by the president. Another $500 billion that's going to get out there. And so, let's have a conversation with it. But one question we did have, and Alan, it comes into, and I'd love to get your thoughts on it, is just in closing, is, what have we seen in light of this crisis at the Signatry from a donor advised fund group as far as giving? Are more people giving into DAS? What are you seeing? What have we seen collectively as an organization?
Well, I'll give you a perspective about the Northwest, and I'd love to hear yours from the Midwest. I'm going to say, in my observations in this past several weeks, is that if the values and virtues of the human being are that as a giver, things haven't changed. They're still giving today. The form in which they give may be different, and the donor advised fund is one tool of giving that's still very appropriate. We've had several that have opened in the past few months, but I don't want to focus in on them much as the tool as much as I do on the act. The act of being generous, and particularly in the giving of financial and non-financial assets, is still, I would say, very robust, because the heart of the givers are solid, and maybe they're more concerned. Maybe they just want to be more focused than they ever were before. But I want to give a story. Allow me to give one story, because this people think in stories. This is a great way to think about it. Remember what I said about waking up in the morning, what can I give away? Here's one thing I shared in my workshops years and years ago. Everybody on the line, think this one through. Good news and bad news. Good news. You are all worth $5 billion right now. You're all worth $5 billion. That's the good news. Bad news, you're the only person on planet Earth. What are you going to do with your $5 billion? Build a hut with it? Make a bow and arrow with it? Build a fire with it? Here's the point. Real fulfillment in wealth is never realized until you apply it into the life of somebody else. Real fulfillment in wealth is never realized until you apply it into the life of somebody else. And are we seeing this in this COVID-19 place? Absolutely, probably even more. I'm seeing it in my neighborhood, what our neighbors are doing. and my church family and my own family. And it's not always financial and sophisticated planning that you and I are worth, but that's the spirit of our I think there are our fellow Americans right now that I'm seeing is quite high.
Yeah, no, that's awesome, Alan. Yeah, and I just again from the Midwest side, I mean, we've seen that same thing. People that are giving are givers right now, and they are giving out, and which is really exciting. So if anything, it's been an uptick in some of this giving season, and people that are hurting, and they're still giving. So, Alan, thank you so much for your time. Advisors that are going to get this recording and you were here, email Alan Pratt, Pratt, Pratt at thesignatry.com. You'll be encouraged. You'll get some great nuggets. I know every time I talk to Alan, I pull out, I'm writing down things, these one-liners I can use that are just fantastic. And so just thank you so much for being a part of this call. The last webinar I did, somebody told me I got a criticism that I was too optimistic. And I said, you know what? The God of the universe, the God that very breath created everything you can see, loves you so much that he sent his son to die for you. If I can't be optimistic anytime I wake up, or even when I don't wake up and I wake up the other side of glory, I mean, praise the Lord for that. So be encouraged, everybody. Thank you so much for being a part of this. Email us, call us. We'd love to chat with you some more. So God bless you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody. God bless you. Bye-bye.